Welcome to the News Hour on RT. Let's get straight to our top story. The Taliban has been making further territorial gains in Afghanistan, including at major border crossing points with Iran and Turkmenistan. Reports there suggest the group's imposing strict Sharia law restrictions, similar to those deployed when they were last in power 20 years ago, including forbidding women from leaving home without a male companion. It comes as America pulls all its troops out of the country, prompting echoes of an earlier conflict in which they were involved, as Saskia Taylor reports.
It only took 20 years, 47,000 civilian deaths and $2 trillion for the US to finally realize that Afghanistan has the right to determine its own fate.
I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome. We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build, and it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country.
A face-saving way of saying that nothing has been achieved in 2 decades and backing out of the, yes, nation-building promises made all those years ago.
Peace will be achieved by helping Afghanistan train and develop its own national army. And peace will be achieved through an education system for boys and girls which works.
Just one of the many pledges that never came through. Forgotten about as the US Army hastily packed up and flew out, having struck a deal with the very enemy it invaded to annihilate and leaving no long-lasting peace plan. But hey, as the Taliban recaptures swathes of territory, at least Washington's sending its best wishes to its abandoned allies in Kabul.
But we're going to stick with you, and we're going to do our best to see to it you have the tools you need.
And so America's forever war wraps up, with its enemies surging back to ascendancy, its allies vulnerable, and millions still desperate for that peace they were promised all those years ago. Travel 4,500 kilometers east, and you'll find the scars of another of America's forever wars. Vietnam. Yes, the US was then saving the people from the Red Terror, not the Taliban terror, but really, the parallels are striking, starting with that time-old promise of freedom, stability, and democracy.
First, are the Vietnamese, with our help and that of our other allies, really making any progress? Is there a forward movement? The reports I see make it clear that there is. Certainly there is a positive movement towards constitutional government. The people wanted an elected, responsive government.
Pretty quickly, that positive energy fell apart, and Washington realized that victory was impossible. Ring a bell? And so, just as in Afghanistan, it inked a deal with the enemy it had set out to get rid of in the first place, the communists in North Vietnam.
And after years of effort, we negotiated a settlement which made it possible for us to remove our forces with honor and bring home our prisoners.
Though at least, unlike President Biden today, who dodges questions about a guilty conscience, President Ford had the decency to just cross out the words "with honor" in his final speech. Oh, and déjà vu Afghanistan, the US pulled out soon after that speech, leaving their allies with, you guessed it, promises that would never come true.
Firm pledges were given to us that the United States will retaliate swiftly and vigorously to any violation of the agreement. We consider those pledges the most important guarantees of the Paris Agreement. Those pledges have now become the most crucial ones to our survival.
2 years later, South Vietnam, abandoned after 2 decades of American presence, was conquered by its northern neighbor. And with the Taliban claiming to control 80% of Afghan lands, that's only 5% less than when the US invaded, fears are growing that Kabul won't even last 2 years. They say history is the greatest teacher. But if that's the case, why has the US learnt nothing? And how many other countries will have to lie in ruins before it finally does?
Saskia Taylor. Well, when asked by a journalist, Joe Biden insisted there's no similarity between the US withdrawals from Vietnam and Afghanistan. The president said he believes the Taliban is not as strong as reports suggest, and its takeover of the nation is, quote, not inevitable. Meanwhile, a former Afghan interpreter who asked to be identified as Rafi for security reasons told us about the persecution people like him face from the Taliban.
Since 2001, the narrative was that Taliban are terrorists.